Hi, the purpose of this video is to introduce you to the Final Project 1, show you how to find it, and get you started. We'll start with where to find the assignment and corresponding files. You want to go to the course information link on the left side of the class page. Once on that page, scroll down to the assignment, guidelines, and rubrics section and click on it. When you get to that page, scroll down until you find the 3 items for the final project. The Final Project 1 document, the Final Project 1 case study, and the Final Project 1 student workbook. Open each of the 3 documents and save them to your hard drive. It's a good idea to also save your files to an external drive like a flash drive in case something happens to your hard drive or you need to work on more than one computer. Let's open each of the files and discuss them. The first document is the Final Project 1 document. This provides you with an overview of the project. You'll learn what you'll do in the accounting workbook and report, and you'll learn which learning outcomes are assessed through the assignment. Next, you'll find the prompt. The prompt frames the assignment, letting you know your real-world situation, which documents you'll use, the Final Project 1 case study and the Final Project 1 student workbook, and what type of work you'll be doing. On the next page, you'll see the specific elements that you need to address in the project. There are 2 sections, one for the workbook. You'll see that you'll be required to analyze transactions and prepare supporting journals for the governmental, proprietary, and fiduciary fund and prepare statements. And 2, for the report to the taxpayers. Scroll down even farther and you'll find the grading rubric for the assignment. This document is important because it tells you how you'll earn points. You can see that there are sections for the workbook and sections for the report. Be sure to check each section carefully to ensure you meet all of the requirements. You can even pre-grade your own work to give you an idea of the score you'll earn. The rubric is 2 pages, so be sure to check out both pages. Now let's take a look at the Final Project 1 case study file. This is the file that contains all of the transactions and information you'll be recording for your project. The section marked important is where you want to start. This section tells you that you need to put coding in column A of the workbook files. Let's see what that looks like. See here in column A, there are yellow highlighted cells next to the account titles. You'll want to code these accounts based on whether they belong on the operating statement or the balance sheet. Balance sheet accounts are coded with a 1, and operating statement accounts are coded with a 2. When we look at the accounts highlighted, we know that these accounts belong to the balance sheet, so we code them with a 1. Scrolling down, we see the accounts highlighted here are operating statement accounts, so we'll code those with a 2. When we look at a couple of entries, we'll see why this coding is important. First, let's look at the case study file. Scrolling down on that first page, you'll see some other important instructions. The first tells you that for some funds, you'll be required to prepare transactions to enter in the worksheet. This is where the coding we just discussed becomes important. The coding will allow the statements to automatically populate from the entries. Next, you're told that for other funds, the transactions will already be recorded in a worksheet and you'll be required to prepare statements from the worksheet. For these fund transactions, the transactions will not automatically populate the statements because you'll be preparing the statements. Finally, you're told that you will be working on the white tabs for the individual funds and account groups. Let's see what that looks like. Here we see the tabs. You'll note that there are tabs in white and tabs in green. The ones in white are the ones where you will enter your transactions or prepare your reports. The ones in green are either automatically populated when you enter your transactions or they have already been completed and you will use them to get information for your statements. You do not need to enter data into the green tabs. Now, let's work through a couple of transactions. The case document is organized by fund, just like your textbook. This allows you to complete parts of the project as you finish each fund. So, for example, By the end of Module 2, you'll be able to complete the general fund portion of the case. starting in Module 3, you'll want to start sending your case progress to your instructor so he or she can review your work, let you know if you're on the right track, and provide feedback if you're going astray. This is a big project, so you need to work ahead. Let's look at a transaction for the general fund. You were told that the City of Springfield levied property taxes for $1,580,000 and estimated that $30,000 of that would be uncollectible. You'll know from your readings and homework that Springfield will need to record taxes receivable current in the amount of $1,580,000. Note in the 1 in the column with the hashtag, the 1 tells you that this is transaction 1. You want to number each transaction to allow the reader to trace the transactions to the case, just like you would reference transactions in a traditional financial accounting system. You will credit the contra account, allowance for uncollectible accounts current, in the amount of $30,000 and put a 1 next to it. Next, you want to scroll down to find the revenues, property taxes, and record a credit of $1,550,000. That's the amount that Springfield expects to collect from the property taxes. Again, you'll enter a 1 in the hashtag column. Now, after each transaction, it's a good idea to scroll down to the bottom of the worksheet to make sure your debits equal your credits in the transaction column. Remember, if they do not equal, you've done something wrong. So here we see that ours equal, so we can move to the next transaction. In the second transaction, you're told that the city collected $1,300,000 of the taxes that were levied in the first transaction. So we know we're going to record a debit to cash and a credit to taxes receivable. Let's take a look. Here we see our debit to cash representing the increase in cash due to the collection of the taxes. We also see a credit to taxes receivable current to reflect the reduction of the receivable. In other words, $1,300,000 of that initial receivable has been collected. Note that we put a 2 in our hashtag columns to show that this is an entry for transaction 2. Now, the problem tells us that the remainder of the taxes receivable becomes delinquent. We see that there is still $280,000 in taxes receivable current. This means our $280,000 now has to be reclassified as delinquent. And here's how we do that. We credit the taxes receivable current by $280,000 to get our receivables amount back down to 0. We debit the taxes receivable delinquent by $280,000 to increase the delinquent account. Again, we put our 2 in the hashtag columns to show these are part of transaction 2. There is still one more part of the transaction that we have to record. Remember, in transaction 1, we recorded $30,000 in the allowance for uncollectible accounts current. Those dollars are no longer current. Because the tax receivable is now delinquent, we want to reclassify the allowance from for uncollectibles from collectible to uncollectible. Let's take a look at that. You'll see, there we go. You'll see the allowance for uncollectibles current is now 0, and the allowance delinquent account is now increased by $30,000. There's just one more thing to do with this transaction. We need to scroll down to the bottom of the page and see if our debits equal our credits, and they do, so we can move on. Remember, they don't balance, you've done something wrong. Fix whatever's wrong before moving on to the next transaction or the next section if you're done with a certain section. So we can move on now. Now, let's take a look at one more thing. Remember that coding we did in column A? The one for the balance sheet accounts and the 2 for the operating statement accounts? Let's look at the operating statement for the general fund. You see that there are numbers in the operating statement that come from the worksheet you prepared. You should recognize the $1,550,000 in tax revenue. This happened because the accounts were coded with the 1 and the 2, and the statements automatically populated. There's also transactions in the balance sheet account too from the ones that we had previously done on our worksheet. Okay, so there's 18 transactions in the general fund. When you finish the general fund, Take a look at the statements on the green tabs to ensure that they've populated properly and that the statements make sense. Then you're done with the general fund. You can submit your file to your instructor for review, and you're ready to move to the special revenue fund. In the special revenue fund instruction part of the case, you're told to use the information on the Addiction Prevention Special Revenue Fund worksheet to prepare the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance and the balance sheet. Down at the bottom of the screen, you see the tab for the Addiction Prevention Special Revenue Fund, APSRF. It contains a worksheet just like the one you completed for the general fund. The difference is that this worksheet is already completed for you. Go to the operating statement columns and the balance sheet columns and use that information to create your statements. For example, in the operating statement columns, you see operating grants receivable for $500,000. Now, on the APOS Addiction Prevention Operating Statement tab, you will find the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance, and enter that $500,000 in the Operating Grants Revenue section. You'll do something similar on the APBS tab for the balance sheet accounts. So there's an overview of the project. Again, be sure to start the project early, save your work often, and submit your file to your instructor for review in modules 3 and 4. I hope you enjoy the project, and remember, if you have any questions, please be sure to reach out to your instructor.